We're into a third clip. We're reading Eamonn Kelly's article about what he identifies as a carving of the solar boat at Knowth. That's a passage mound in Ireland, in the Boyne Valley. And I'm not going to say too much more. I've already done plenty of intro. We'll just keep going here. So, images of the solar boat are found commonly in Egyptian tombs where the sun god Ra appears bearing the solar disk on his head, accompanied by a heron-like bird known as the Bennu bird. A good example of this occurs on the tomb of the ancient Egyptian artisan known as Semedjer, who died around 1268 BC and was buried at present-day Deir el-Medina near Thebes. Okay, let's just stop there briefly. There is a bird-like pattern that appears in the sun's corona during some total solar eclipses. When I first saw that bird-like pattern in French astronomer Serge Couchemy's photo of the 1991 total solar eclipse that was published in the May 1992 issue of National Geographic, I immediately intuited that this bird of the sun, essentially, was almost certainly the original source of inspiration of the phoenix myth. What is the phoenix myth? Well, there's many variations, but essentially it's one bird. It's only one. It dies and it's reborn on the same day out of its own ashes. The different versions of the myth essentially, so there's essentially centuries between the death and rebirth of the phoenix. There's not something that happens every day or every week or month or year. This is something that happens at rare intervals. And some of the numbers in some of the myths essentially are solar cycle numbers. There's a report, I believe, by Herodotus, or forget it, Herodotus, however you pronounce it. There's a report, essentially, from a early historian saying that the Egyptians were calculating the return of the phoenix. So they were basically mathematically trying to determine when the phoenix would return. And also, they were also reputed by either Herodotus or Diodorus Siculus to be able to calculate eclipses. According to these early historians, they were very well versed in terms of eclipses, and they were able to calculate them. Now, this is just something said by an ancient historian, but nevertheless, you put those things together, and you can easily see that, well, yeah, I guess the Egyptians knew about this bird-like pattern and try to calculate when they might see it again, when there'd be another total solar eclipse. And certainly the winged sun symbols of Egypt can be shown to have been inspired by this bird-like pattern. The solar falcon god Horus, if you look at his myth and everything, it's almost certain that he was inspired by this bird-like pattern in the sun's corona. Horus is even described as a winged disc in some later forms of the myth, Ptolemaic versions of the myth that clearly describe the solar falcon god Horus as a winged disc or going up to the sun in the form of a disc. Again, do the math on that. It's actually pretty simple, straightforward math. And so the Bennu bird is essentially the Egyptian version of the phoenix. And so they actually had multiple versions. They had different myths arising from the same phenomena. Thoth, the baboon god, also had an ibis form. And that ibis form of Thoth, as far as I'm concerned, it's just a variation on the theme. It's in this case, because Thoth is a moon god as opposed to a sun god, so the way I see it is that the ibis form of Thoth is inspired by the same phenomena, but thinking in terms of a winged lunar disk as opposed to a winged solar disk. Actually, that's closer to the truth, because it's the moon hiding the sun that you see. You see this black disk. Well, that's not the sun, it's the moon. And shining out around it is the sun's corona, and sometimes it looks a lot like a bird. Look for images of the 1991 total solar eclipse, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So where were we here? Right. So a wall mural on the tomb shows Ra standing in the solar boat wearing the solar disk. 5 attendants. 5 attendant deities stand behind Ra, while on the prow stands the protective Bennu bird, believed to be the soul of Ra. This is actually very interesting. The Bennu bird as the soul of Ra, because the soul is equated with breath in many traditions, and the sun's corona, which takes on this bird-like form, is essentially, it's the breath of the sun, as it were. It's the atmosphere of the sun. It's gases coming off the sun. So it's very interesting how but in any case, and the idea of the soul in bird form, you also have the ba bird, and you have essentially the Bennu bird, Horus, Thoth in ibis form. There's also a vulture goddess, Nekbet. All of these bird gods of ancient Egyptian religions, as far as I'm concerned, they're inspired by the same phenomena, the bird-like pattern in the sun's corona. They're just variations on that theme. They're different myths, possibly that they came about independently in different villages and towns, and then they were sort of all amalgamated into the Egyptian religion at some point. But that's my take on that, and it's pretty solid. Like Ra himself, the Bennu bird was believed to be a self-created deity that played a role in the creation of the world, and which linked the sun with creation, rebirth, and as an ancestor deity. Full-sized solar boats were buried near ancient Egyptian tombs and temples, and these ritual vessels were designed to carry the resurrected pharaohs across the heavens with the sun god Ra. The earliest examples of Egyptian solar boats date to the first dynasty around 3100 BC, so around the same time as Knowth and Delph, maybe a little bit later, but not much. And these have been found at sites such as Saqqara, Tarkhan, and Helvan. My eyesight's not superb, and sometimes I have difficulty reading. I am not wearing reading glasses. If I had any brains, I'd go get some reading glasses, because I do actually have some. But I almost never wear glasses. Anyhow, so we see this image. We see this image here, the boat, upturned prows. It's a very crescent-like. You can almost see, a crescent sun there, and then you have the solar disk with the dot in the middle of it. The dot in the middle of it is significant, shall we say. And then, here we have Ra Herecte, basically looking like Horus, like a falcon head, solar disk on top of the head. On the right, the Bennu bird, the heron, with a crown of plumes. Astronomers do describe especially the polar rays and streamers of the sun as plumes, and there's certainly a plume-like appearance to the sun's corona. So these crowns, which nobody will dispute are solar symbols. The plumes, as far as I'm concerned, are inspired by the plumes that may be seen during a total solar eclipse. So there's the solar boat. Looks like it has a lotus at the rear. You've got an eye of Horus under the feet of the attendants. The eye of Horus is inspired by the eye-like appearance of the total eclipsed sun. I'm not seeing the front of the boat very well. I probably should have got some reading glasses. This is, very stylized. But yes, you can see a ring-like symbol in, sort of a boat-like symbol. I should add that when the moon is too far away from the Earth to have an apparent size large enough to totally eclipse the sun, but nevertheless does eclipse the sun, you have what's known as an annular eclipse of the sun. So you don't see the corona, you see a thin ring of the sun around the lunar disk when it's central. So this ring could very well be not just the sun, but a annular eclipse of the sun. And here, speaking of annular eclipses, this is the carving that Mr. Kelly was talking about. So we have these, basically upturned crescents here, and these upturned crescents are very, very similar to what you see in the partial phases of an annular eclipse. Now, to be strictly scientific about it, an annular eclipse is a partial eclipse of the sun. The sun is never totally eclipsed in an annular eclipse. You have this ring when it is central. But when I say partial phases, what I mean is before the moon is central with the solar disk and you have a ring around the moon. Before you get to that stage, you have something that looks just like that. You have the smaller moon and the larger sun, and the moon is not central, so the upper part or lower part, depending on the stage of the eclipse, you see the inverted crescents here. You can look at sequential photos of annular eclipses, and what you will see is an upturned solar crescent, just like this, and then between it and an inverted crescent, you'll have the annular eclipse. You'll have this is not shown here. There's a line between these two depictions. There's no clear annular eclipse, but nevertheless, I think Eamonn Kelly is correct in identifying this as the solar boat. He may not have understood that the solar boat is inspired by the partial phases of a solar eclipse seen close to water, but I have filled him in about that. And then you have the inverted solar crescent too. And unfortunately, I'm not going to go to it right now, but you can see this and this with a ring between in sequential photos of annular eclipses. So I think it's very, very solid, rock solid, shall we say, that this is a depiction, as far as I'm concerned, of specifically an annular eclipse of the sun, because the diameter of the moon, the inner part, is smaller than the outer part of the crescent. And there were annular eclipses. Off the top of my head, I don't have the dates, but there were several around that time period. So, in the Boyne Valley in Ireland, the passage tombs of Knowth were constructed between 3300 BC and 2900 BC. That gives us a bit of leeway in terms of eclipses. Overlapping with the Egyptian First Dynasty, the principal mound at Knowth is retained by a series of 127 curbstones, most of which are decorated. Further decoration is to be found on the stones that form the passages and chambers of the monument. In fact, over a quarter of all known megalithic art in Western Europe occurs at Knowth and its satellite mounds. That's 25% of all of the known megalithic art in all of Western Europe is at Knowth. And then you have Newgrange and Douth and Loughcrew, which would add to that. So a very high percentage of megalithic rock art of Western Europe is in the Boyne Valley, probably 30% or more. It is perhaps due to the prolific amount of art that is to be found at Knowth that the significance of one key image appears to have been overlooked. I could say the same thing about the Sun-Moon conjunction symbol on the basin in Knowth. Anyhow, that image is to be found on a curbstone in the northwest sector of the main mound, designated as curbstone 86, figure 8. It is a trapezoidal-shaped stone that appears to be damaged at the top and on the left side. A design has been carefully pecked out on the surface of the stone, the elements of which can best be seen on a schematic drawing. Let's see if I can scroll without going too far here. Figure 9. The interpretation presented here is that the image on curbstone 86 expresses the fundamental cosmological belief of those who carved it. There is an outer oval line that represents the edge of the cosmos. So I guess he's talking about this. In each quarter of the cosmos, there is a crescent-shaped image of the solar boat, which is meant to indicate the motion of the solar boat through the cosmos. The cosmos is divided by a horizontal line into an upper and lower area representing the bright upper region and the lower darkened underworld. At each end of the horizontal line there are cup marks that represent sunrise and sunset. Okay, I'm not seeing those. I'll have to have another look. Above and below the central point of the line there are two more cup marks which represent midday. Oh yeah, so there's the cup marks there and there. So he's got a pretty strong interpretation here, and he's pretty emphatic about it. And believe me, I can be pretty emphatic about my own interpretations too. So we're not going to be overly critical about that. But that is Eamonn Kelly's interpretation of this. I think he's absolutely right about the solar boat. No mention of solar eclipses here, by the way, but I did bring him up to speed about that. And he agreed with me, essentially, is what it comes down to. So yeah, the cup marks, there's things that you can quibble about the interpretation. There's other things that are much more obvious. Like this, you can see photographs of the same thing taken during an annular eclipse. Same thing here. You can see photographs, as I said, of this and this with a ring-shaped sun between them, and this is a sequential photo of an annular eclipse taking place at sunrise or sunset. So to me, there's virtually no question that these crescents are representations of the non-central annular eclipse of the sun, and yes, that's where the concept of the solar boat comes from, although it can also come from the crescent seen during a total solar eclipse where the moon's diameter is larger, but an upturned crescent of the sun rising out of water or sinking into it is what inspired the solar boat, in my opinion. And I see we're running out of time here, so just a few seconds left, and I see the battery's not doing so well. It looks like we're going to have to do another clip after changing the battery.